Pledge of Allegiance.
Today, we will have 7th grade student Jayla Hall from Longfellow Middle School lead the Pledge of Allegiance tonight. Jayla is the daughter of Lavelle and Dorinda Hall and has 3 siblings: Lavelle Jr., 5th grade, Nia, 1st grade, both students at Admiral King Elementary School, and Naya, 3 years old. Jayla is an honor student with all A's. After their pledge, Jayla will speak about leadership. Jayla's principal, Ms. Christine Miller, is here tonight to support her student.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good evening. My name is Jayla Hall. I am thankful to have parents that care about me positively. They have always taught my siblings and I that positive leadership is extremely important and necessary, and that we are to set good examples for others. They have also taught us that we are not followers but leaders, just like a well-known man in history, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So tonight, I chose to talk about and support something that I think Americans need to be reminded about. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a true leader, one who provided guidance and direction. Dr. King had the ability to effectively impact. He had a different perspective than most people, and he decided that he shared it with the entire world. He believed that everyone should be treated equally all across the world, no matter what their appearance. He guided with a true purpose, set great examples, and had true intentions and potential. The scriptures such as these assisted him in seeking advancement. I believe true leadership ability determines a person's level of effectiveness. Dr. King was a true leader with a destination. Not only was he that, but he understood what it took to get there, organized, and overcame obstacles long before they appeared, and didn't stop until he made an effective change. He believed in change. He took time out for preparation, showed confidence, and gained trust from the people he was leading. The law of E.F. Hutton, one who owned one of the most financial firms in the U.S., stated, "When real leaders speak, people listen," which I believe in 100%. If most Americans could be true leaders, not caring about who disagrees with what they know is right, then America could come together as one and bring about positive change in our schools, in our communities, and our world, just as Dr. King demonstrated. Sometimes Americans start to make changes but do not reach the finish line because we care too much of others' perspectives. With that being said, leadership is built upon its leaders, seeing things others can't, making changes and successfully moving forward before others know what's happening, like great coaches on game day. Aside from that, I strive to excel academically, and aspire to be a great leader. Great leadership is supported by leaders who are readers of people. Just as Martin Luther King showed us, intuitive leaders can sense what's happening among people and almost instantly know their hopes, fears, and concerns. In addition, effective leadership entails spreading passion for success. It includes looking out for good people to help lead and grow. It encompasses empowering others, reproducing, and is the touching of hearts of people before asking for a hand. It's the ability to move or impel a person to some action, just as Dr. King demonstrated. We need to stand up and play an important role in life. So as I end my speech tonight, I'd like to leave you with what I feel is most fundamental about effective leadership. Leadership is guided by the law of influence. In other words, the true measure of leadership is influence. Nothing more, nothing less. Be the change you want to see in the world. Thank you.
Will the parents and siblings of Jayla Hall please stand up to be recognized? Jayla, thank you for a presentation on leadership. As an appreciation for leading us with the Pledge of Allegiance and your speech, I would like to give you the certificate of appreciation. Thank you. Good afternoon, John.
Thank you, and welcome everyone to our first board meeting of the new year. And for many of you, this is not an ordinary meeting. We have some procedural things that we have to do, swearing in of our new board members and some other items that set our order for the coming year, or the year that we're in. So again, welcome and be patient. This meeting is in a couple of parts, so again, it's slightly unusual. At this time, we would like Mr. Weber, I believe it's time for the oath of office for new board members.
Mr. Macchia. Do you solemnly swear that you will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of Ohio, and that you will faithfully and impartially discharge your duties as board member of the Board of Education of Lorain City School District, Lorain County, Ohio, to the best of your ability and in accordance with the laws now in effect and hereafter to be enacted during your continuance in said office and until your successor is elected and qualified? Congratulations, sir. Mr. Fells? Do you solemnly swear that you will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of Ohio, and that you will faithfully and impartially discharge your duties as board member of the Board of Education of the Lorain City School District, Lorain County, Ohio, to the best of your ability and in accordance with the laws now in effect and hereafter to be enacted during your continuance in said office and until your successor is elected and qualified?
I do.
Congratulations, sir.
Congratulations to Mr. Fallis and Mr. Damachia. At this time, we would like to open the floor for nominations for the president of the board for this calendar year.
I'd like to nominate Mr. Williams.
Second. Nominations do not need to be seconded.
There's a nomination.
I'd like to nominate Mr. Smith.
Any additional nominations? I believe the next format is to close the nominations. And then do we proceed with the vote?
I'm sorry, what again? A motion to close, motion and second.
Motion to close nominations.
Support.
Roll call.
Mr. Damachia.
Yes.
Mr. Fallis.
Yes.
Mr. Smith.
You have to say who you're voting for, do you not?
This is to close the nominations.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mr. Sturgill.
Yes.
Mr. Williams.
Yes.
I will vote on the vote in the presidency. Actually take the vote now.
Okay. So now we will take the vote by stating the name of who you vote for.
Mr. Damachia votes for.
Mr. Williams.
Mr. Fallis votes for.
Mr. Smith.
Mr. Smith votes for.
Mr. Smith.
Mr. Sturgill votes for.
Mr. Williams.
I'm the tiebreaker.
Mr. Williams votes for.
Mr. Williams.
You'll be sorry.
Wow. That's a tough tiebreak vote right there.
It's just a trap, that's all.
The president then is Mr. Williams.
Thank you. And next is a motion on the vice president, and I would make a motion that...
You're doing your oath of office.
There's an
Your
oath
oath of
first.
office.
Oh, my oath of office, I guess I have to do that.
Do you solemnly swear that you will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of Ohio, and that you will faithfully and impartially discharge your duties as board president of the Board of Education of the Lorain City School District, Lorain County, Ohio, to the best of your ability and in accordance with the laws now in effect and hereafter to be enacted during your continuance in said office until your successor is elected and qualified. Congratulations, sir.
We will now open the floor for nominations for the Vice President. And I would like to nominate Mr. Bill Sturgill for Vice President.
I will nominate Mr. Fallis.
Are there any other nominations? Can we have a motion to close the nominations?
Motion to close the nominations.
Support.
Roll call.
Mr. Damachia,
Yes.
Mr. Fallis,
Yes.
Mr. Smith,
Yes.
Mr. Sturgill,
Yes.
Mr. Williams.
Yes.
The vote on Vice Presidency, Mr. Damachia votes for,
Mr. Sturgeon?
Mr. Fallis votes for,
Mr. Fallis.
Mr. Smith votes for,
Mr. Fallis.
Mr. Sturgill votes for,
Mr. Sturgill.
Mr. Williams votes for.
Mr. Sturgill.
Mr. Sturgill is the Vice President.
Oath of office.
Do you solemnly swear that you will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of Ohio, and that you will faithfully and impartially discharge your duties as Vice President of the Board of Education of the Lorain City School District, Lorain County, Ohio, to the best of your ability in accordance with the laws now in effect and hereafter to be enacted during your continuance in said office and until your successor is elected and qualified? Congratulations, sir.
This time, we'd like to proceed with the fixing of the day, time, and place of the standard board meeting, regular board meeting. The recommendation, and this would be due for some discussion. Previously, our board meetings have been on Monday and Wednesdays, and there has been some, just Wednesdays, I'm sorry, Wednesdays. There's been some a discussion around changing that day to possibly Thursday, and some of the reasons, City Council meets opposite of us on Wednesdays, and so it would maybe make it more expedient for us to have a greater interaction. Also, it's been brought to our attention that there are some fairly regular conflicts with sports schedules and things that disallow some of the public from attending. So perhaps this would be a good time to consider an alternative day. And Thursday is on the calendar seemingly what looks to be the better day. Is there any discussion around that or suggestions?
I would prefer it to remain on Wednesday. That's my comment. Thank you.
Well, there seems to be, as Mr. Williams said, there's some concerns. There's a lot of things going on in the buildings, not just sports events, and we moved the board meeting, as Mr. Damachia will remember, from Monday to Wednesday so that it did not conflict with City Hall and City Council. And as you saw in the newspaper today, both organizations are committed to working together. And so I would agree with Mr. Williams in that it seems to me and the people I've asked that Thursday is the least conflicting day. Whatever the pleasure of the body is. I move that we. You want to do them all at once, Mr. President, the time and everything, or separately?
All together.
So how
When we
about
get
the
there.
timing then? Keep it at 6:30?
6:30. Can we turn it down just a little bit? It's really squealing up here. 6:30. And would we be looking at the first and third or second and fourth?
Well, I think Mr. Weber would prefer the second and the fourth simply because of month-end reports. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, I prefer the second and fourth, yes.
So I would say second and fourth, beginning with the second Thursday or the fourth Thursday in January, which would be 2 weeks from tomorrow, would be the first on the new night. And then it would be for the balance of the year, the second and fourth Thursdays.
Okay. And just with Mr. Fallis, is there, does this present a significant challenge? It's,
I will defer to, I haven't had a chance to do a thorough analysis of what would be a better day for the community, so I will defer to Mr. Smith's comments.
okay.
So I'll withdraw my preference. Thank you.
Thank you. So the recommendation will be for the board meetings to convene on the second and fourth Thursday of the month at 6:30 p.m. here at Frank Jacinto.
Is just some clarification, does the law require a meeting place to be set? Or can it be to be announced? Because I would like
Just
to
the time
see
and the
us
place.
move around town.
So I will modify that motion to be the second and fourth Thursday at 6:30, place to be announced.
At least 2 weeks in advance. At the last regular meeting, we could, if we wanted to, tonight, if we wanted to have the next regular meeting at another building, that's the last thing, or was the last thing on the agenda, so.
Okay. Any other comments or discussion?
So it's the second and fourth Thursday
Yes.
at 6:30 at two locations to be announced, correct? Who made the motion?
I made the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay.
Roll call.
Mr. Williams?
Yes.
Mr. Sturgill?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Fallis?
Yes.
Mr. Demakia?
Yes.
Item 2, tape and televised regular board meetings. It is recommended that the regular board meeting of the Lorain City School Board be taped and televised on TV Channel 20, the school channel.
So move.
Support.
Roll call. Discussion?
There's been some concern from citizens who have spoken during hearing of the public that when they watch it on TV, that part has been edited. And I would say that it should be shown in its entirety, as long as, in other words, if somebody makes comments we don't like, we need to hear those. They shouldn't be edited out. But Mr. Branham, Dr. Branham would control that, so.
And then what I would suggest is if there there's any public statement that would compromise identity or anything that would not be appropriate, with discretion. For example, if a person's named or a student's named something that would not be reasonable, that that you would take the leisure to edit those pieces. But in general, as long as there's nothing illegal or inappropriate being stated, that the meeting would be aired in its entirety.
We're in discussion.
I have a question for the superintendent relative to this issue. This item before us is for the taping of the school board meeting on the TV channel. Does the Lorain City School System have the ability to tape our school board meetings and have them put on their webpage to
I don't
accommodate
know.
those who do not have access to Channel 20?
We do
That's
not,
okay.
we do not presently have that.
Is that something that you could look into and see if that would be something that we could do that wouldn't be too costly for the school system, to provide another avenue to present our meetings to the public? Thank you.
Any more discussion? We could call the vote to order.
Mr. Smith,
Yes.
Mr. Fellis,
Yes.
Mr. Sturgill,
Yes.
Mr. Williams,
Yes.
Mr. Demakia.
Yes.
Item number 3, order of business and procedure. It is recommended that the following order of business and procedure be approved. Authorize the treasurer to send each board member and all other members involved a complete transcript of the minutes of all meetings before the next regular meeting for the board to approve or amend, if necessary, in order to dispense with the usual reading. Copies to be sent to specifically board members, superintendent, appropriate administrators, and the Lorain Education Association president. After approval, the minutes shall be placed on the district's website. B, grant authorization to the treasurer to issue warrants and payments of bills and contractual obligations in 2012 is hereby confirmed and ratified, with the exception when special action should be considered by the board to provide a check register of all bills paid and a printout of all purchase orders in excess of $500. And under C, it gives the adopted order, which I will read. 1, call to order. 2, roll call. 3, pledge of allegiance, led by student. 4, recognition of visitors. 5, approve or amend and sign minutes. 6, old business. 7, report and recommendations of the treasurer. 8, report and recommendations of the superintendent. 9, new business. 10, committee reports and requests from board members. 11, hearing of the public. 12, board work session as needed. 13, announcements of the next board meeting. And 14, adjournment. And then D, a Lorain City School District citizen recognized by the chair may speak on any issue during the hearing of the public session, but the chair may limit remarks pursuant to the debate regulations of Robert's Rules of Order. Is there any discussion on these items?
Yes, I have heard a number of citizens complain about the hearing of the public being at the end of the agenda. And until about a year ago, each board meeting agenda had 2 hearings of the public. One at the beginning, after introduction of recognition of visitors, and then one at the end, because some people really don't want to sit here all night to wait to state their opinion. So I would suggest that we re-add the first hearing of the public and that it appear as item number 5, and then everything would be backed up by one number. And I make a motion on that change.
I'll second that.
And this does maybe need some discussion and explanation for our consideration as we deliberate this. There were a number of reasons why the first public hearing was omitted. One of the things that became problematic is, I think, when we go into executive session especially, and then come back out, and members of the public have not been able to address the board. One of the, I think, challenges that we have is at the beginning of meetings, based on the duration of the meeting, it sometimes add considerable length and also had an impact on the flow of the meeting. Definitely, we do not want to limit or eliminate the public opportunity to address the board. So I think it's, I'm not against having 2 hearings of the public by any means. But again, it's something that we have to exercise some efficiency with.
Well, it worked well for 30 years, and there were no problems. Board policy limits it to 30 minutes. That would include both the first and the second. It also allows the board to make a motion if the 30 minutes has expired and there are still more people who want to speak. And I think we need to, for transparency, openness, and because we really need to know what's on people's minds, we need to go back to where we have been so many years, and it worked fine. I don't recall any problems in my first 2 or 3 years on the board. So again, that's why I made the motion that's been seconded, and
Okay.
I would like to see that be the agenda.
Quite often, I don't really want to hear from the public sometimes, but I think you need to hear. I mean, my first day that I got here, I was here about 5 minutes, and a lady was pointing her finger at me and yelling at me. But still, I think it's really good to include the community in on everything, and I agree with Jim. I think there's a level of transparency that we need to get back, and that's why I would go for 2.
There's a motion. Any other comments? And there's a second. So we would first motion to amend the agenda to add the first hearing of the public under item 5. Everything would be displaced accordingly. Roll call on that, please.
President Williams, may I have a comment before you vote, please?
Please.
I like the idea of putting the hearing of the public right after item 4 on the original agenda because it's before business. And if I'm going to deliberate and do my homework on an issue that we're going to vote on, I'm going to come up with my position on how I'm going to vote. I might talk to my fellow board members, might call a few people up in the community to get their input. But it doesn't provide an opportunity for me to hear from the public before I vote. And you may say something that would change my vote, that would be important in my decision-making process. So I would support placing the hearing of the public after item 4 on the agenda as stated here before amendment. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is the motion to amend the order of business, and then we'll take a vote to approve the final one in a second here. So the motion to amend the order of business, Mr. Smith.
And that would be to add an extra hearing of
item-
the public, as
right.
item 4.
At a hearing in public after item 4.
Okay. Yes.
Mr. Sturgill.
Yes.
Mr. Demakia.
Yes.
Mr. Fallis.
Yes.
Mr. Williams.
Yes.
Now we're going to vote on the,
The entire agenda.
yeah.
I need a motion to vote on the entire agenda now.
I move to vote on the entire agenda as amended.
I would support that motion.
Roll call.
Mr. Smith.
Yes.
Mr. Fallis.
Yes.
Mr. Demakia.
Yes.
Mr. Sturgill.
Yes.
Mr. Williams.
Yes. Item number 4, set board member compensation. It is recommended that the board members, as provided by state law, will be compensated at a rate not exceeding $125 per meeting attended. Also, as provided by state law, board members are offered participation in the district's health insurance plans. All cost of participation will be borne by board members. Okay. Need a motion
Motion
to set.
approve item 4.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
Motion to amend.
Amend in what regard, sir?
To bring clarity to the folks who are doing the payroll for the school board members, I would make the following amendment. I would amend that we would strike the words "not exceeding" and insert the word "of," that thereby giving clarity as to the exact amount of compensation for each board meeting. That concludes my amendment. Thank you.
So there's been a motion to amend the reading that it would now state, it is recommended that board members, as provided by state law, will be compensated at a rate of $125. Question is, does the ORC have this language? Is this the specific ORC language, or is this language that we can amend?
I don't know. I haven't, this has probably been on that paragraph probably for years. I don't know.
Then I would suggest that,
The maximum under law right now is $125.
That's right.
You could make it less, you could not make it more. And any changes made tonight will not affect anyone presently on the board. So even if we wanted to lower, it would still be what it was when we, until our terms are up. So I don't know that this, the language is basically saying the same thing. All we know is under the ORC, we can't be paid more than 125. And any changes made would not affect any of us tonight anyway. So at one time, board members got no compensation for school board. So
I would ask Mr. Weber or Mr. Giardini, the language that presently exists has enough clarity that provides for Mr. Fallis's concerns?
Mr. Williams, the board, either would do. I think what Mr. Fallis's motion was to say this is what it is for sure, as opposed to being not to exceed 125. The other language was acceptable as well, because it said not to exceed 125, and that's what the code says. So either works. I guess if you pass this, then someone couldn't decide, well, for this meeting, we're going to pay $75 for new board members. I can't imagine that would ever happen, but...
And according to what we've already signed up for, that wouldn't be able to take effect until the next...
Right.
well, I think the word
There's nothing wrong with the language that Mr. Fallis
I
recommended.
think the word exceed does appear in the code.
Right. You can't go above 125, and
In the code, it does say making changes. The OSBA recommends that if board members want to change compensation, they do it at the last meeting of the year in December, when new board members are coming in for a new term.
Right.
But that doesn't apply here tonight, and since there'll be no term changes for at least 2 years, unless someone leaves the board and someone comes on, so I think I would be more comfortable just using what the code says, because you can't go beyond it anyway, and we couldn't go less if we wanted to.
There is a motion, and if it doesn't have a second, then we would continue. So we'll at least leave the opportunity for any board member to second Mr. Fallis's motion. There is no second, but we do recognize that it is specific. Mr. Fallis said it is 125. And, thank you for that input.
Yes, sir.
Now, can we have a roll call vote
So who's the one?
on the motion as read?
I missed the 1 and 2 before the amendment. I missed the motion and the second before the proposed amendment.
Can we have a motion to approve the recommendation to set board member compensation, item number 4?
Motion to approve that.
Second.
I thought we had that.
we did. He didn't write it down.
Oh, I see.
I missed it.
Oh, okay.
We lost him in the
All
discussion.
right.
Okay. Mr. Damachia,
Yes.
Mr. Sturgill,
Yes.
Mr. Smith,
Yes.
Mr. Fallis,
Yes.
and Mr. Williams.
Yes. Item number 5, resolution establishing service fund for 2012. It is recommended that the following resolution establishing the service fund for the year 2012 be approved. Whereas Section 3315.15 of the Revised Code of the State of Ohio provides for the setting aside from the general fund a sum not to exceed $2 for each child enrolled and $20,000, whichever is greater, except that in the case of a county board of education, the fund shall not exceed $20,000. Such sum of money to be known as the service fund, to be used only in paying the expenses of members of such boards of education actually incurred in the performance of their duties, or in paying the expenses of members elect of such boards of education actually incurred in training and orientation to the performance of their duties from the date of election to the date of administration of the oath of office. Such payments shall be made only in such amount as may be approved by the Board of Education on statement of the general members or members elect, furnished and at the next succeeding regular meeting of the School Board of Education. And Uh-oh.
And what?
And whereas no school district shall appropriate to expend a sum greater than $60,000 in any one school year for such service fund. And now therefore it be resolved that the Board of Education of the Lorain City School District does hereby establish a service fund, such fund to be set aside as an account within the general fund, and there is hereby appropriated for the purpose of said services, fund the sum of $20,000, which amount shall be incorporated into the appropriations for the school district calendar year 2012.
Motion to approve item 5.
Support.
Any discussion?
I would like,
Go ahead, Bill. Sorry. Go ahead, Mr. Sturgill.
I would like to hear an explanation. I heard what you read, and I've read it, but I would like somebody to break it down for the public in 3 or 4 sentences. Mr. Weber?
This account service fund is used for the training of board members, actually from the potential date of election every year to help. It's the covey sharpening the saw to train the Board of Education for various things if they so choose. It's an appropriation, doesn't mean we're going to spend it. We haven't spent anywhere near that amount the last 3 years. And for example, if we went to Capitol Conference or maybe we bring somebody and do some training for the board on board responsibilities or whatnot, that's what you could potentially use this for. It's almost every district I've talked to does this type of service fund.
So this goes from the day of election? If
Yes,
somebody incurred an expense in the training as a board member, say if a person went away to a seminar even before they were on the board?
Right. If Mr. Fowles had, once election was certified, say December 1st, if he wanted to go to Columbus for some board training, this would have taken care of that. Yeah.
Okay, I happen to know that Mr. Fallis did in fact do that, so that's why I'm bringing this up. But thank you for the explanation.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions or discussion?
Could we, I have asked this in the past, there doesn't seem to be an established account that we could look from time to time.
There's
Is
an
there?
account for this. Yes, there is. It's in the board account. We segregated out for the service fund.
Okay, all right.
Roll call?
Mr. Demakia?
Yes.
Mr. Fallis?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Sturgill?
Yes.
Mr. Williams?
Yes. Item number 6, this is one of those always interesting ones. Legislative Liaison Appointment for Government, Legislative, and Student Achievement.
I nominate Mr. Fallis.
Support.
Discussion? Would Mr. Fallis like to know what he's being nominated for?
He probably read
I
it.
did read the material, and I do have a heart and concern for the advancement of our students academically, so I would welcome the nomination. Thank you.
Okay. And there are no other nominations, so...
Well, you do know that you have to report, okay, to the board, all right. We're counting on you. Yes, sir.
We'll be looking forward to hearing from you on these legislative items that come up.
Monthly.
And I'll be looking for your feedback to assist me.
Good.
Roll call? Or should I read that with Mr. Fallis' name in it, or did you have it?
Yes. Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Demakia?
Yes.
Mr. Fallis?
Yes.
Mr. Sturgill?
Yes.
Mr. Williams?
Yes. Item number 7, payment of annual membership dues to the OSBA. It is recommended that the annual membership dues to the OSBA for calendar year 2012 and briefcase and school management news subscription in the amount of $8,788 be approved.
So move.
Support.
Discussion?
I, at one time, was not in favor of doing this, but my first year on the board, this is an extremely important advantage for board members because we were kept up to date on what's going on in the legislature. For instance, an email or by email recently, this is what Mr. Fallis will be reporting on now, from now on, Mr. Fallis. There's a $45 million fund that's been established in Ohio for political subdivisions that want to go together in shared services. And I believe, Mr. Weber, you indicated you're going to that, and you'll fill us in at the board meeting following, because if there's $45 million on the table, I think we ought to poke our nose around a little bit to get some of it. And that gets back to the story in the paper today. Here's an area where the city and the school district can work together and do some things that are mutually beneficial to the community and maybe get a little easement on a little, ease on their pocketbook.
I would like to recommend that Mr. Fallis be put on the OSBA list so that he can also receive this. It seems that it took him a year to find me, so I'm just hoping that maybe he
We'll make
gets
sure that happens.
He'll gets it a little
Good point,
sooner,
Bill.
because it is a tool. It really
It
is
is.
good.
Thank you for letting that interference for me, sir.
Mitch, prepare to get an overload because they send stuff
Okay.
frequently.
And
Check
it's,
my junk email box. Okay.
it's good stuff.
There's a motion and a second. Roll call.
Mr. Smith,
Yes?
Mr. Fallis,
Yes.
Mr. Demakia,
Yes.
Mr. Sturgill,
Yes,
Mr. Williams.
Yes. Item number 8, authorization for superintendent to act as representative for grants. It is recommended that the superintendent be appointed as the authorized representative and grants officer for all local, state, and federal grants for calendar year 2012.
I would like to make a motion for approval with one amendment. Do I have to have two separate motions?
Okay, first, what is,
Or you can move to have it as recommended and then amend it, or you can make a motion with the amendment on.
I'd like to make a motion to approve this agenda item with one amendment. What I'd like to do in changing this is to grant the superintendent the ability to receive grants from a private source. So my amendment will be as follows. After the word state, put a comma, remove the word and before the word federal. After federal, insert the word and the word private grant. That concludes my amendment.
Mr. Weber, did you get that?
Yes, I did.
So wouldn't we not first have to have a motion to approve and then amend?
Yeah, the amendment is, it'll read, is recommended, and correct Mr. Fallis if I'm wrong, it's recommended the superintendent be appointed as the authorized representative and grants officer for all local, state, federal, and private source grants.
That is correct.
Yeah. That's the motion on the table to do that. Then we'll we'll first vote to change that, then we'll vote on the actual item itself.
So there's a motion, we need a second for the amendment.
Correct.
Support.
Roll call.
Mr. Fallis,
Yes.
Mr. Demakia,
Yes.
Mr. Smith,
Yes?
Mr. Sturgill,
yes.
Mr. Williams.
Yes. And now a motion to approve the amendment as newly read with the inclusion of and private.
Correct.
Motion to approve.
Support.
There's one, not as just as a bit of information, and there's a lot of confusion in the community, and I think on the board, to try to grasp the grant scene. So it would be helpful, Mr. Superintendent, that when we're applying for a grant, just as a heads up, that you make board members aware of that. Maybe, certainly when we get the grant, make the community aware of that. Because sometimes, in the haste of doing things, I mean, this district could not survive without grants. Believe me, we would be in deeper trouble than we're already in. It's just that I think we need to do a good job of keeping the board appraised of that as well as the community. And that's not a motion or anything, that's just information, commentary. Thank you.
Thank you. And a roll call vote?
Mr. Sturgill?
Yes.
Mr. Demakia? Yes. Mr. Fallis?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Williams?
Yes. Item number 9, participate in state and federal programs. It is recommended that approval be granted for Lorain City Schools to apply for and participate in local, state, federal, and private grant programs.
Motion to approve with an amendment.
Okay.
What I like to do is the wording within item 9, I like to have the caption mirror that. So my amendment would be as follows. After the word participate in, I'd like to insert the word local. After state, I like to insert a comma. I'd like to eliminate the word and. After the word federal, I'd like to insert the word and insert the word private. And then the first sentence after the word programs, I like to eliminate the period, insert the word for 2012, period. That concludes my amendment.
Okay, need some clarity.
You have to have a motion on the floor that's seconded to amend it. So I will move that the recommendation as it appears as item 9 be adopted. Now that would need a second, and then you would amend it.
Second.
Now the amendment is, as the word private is already in there.
Word private is already there.
What was your, again, Mr. Fallis?
What I'm trying to accomplish is that the caption under item 9 mirror what's in the body.
So you want the caption to read
I would like the caption.
exactly the same.
Yes. Would you like me to repeat the amendment?
I understand. So the caption, the bold print underline, you would like to have it say participate in state, private, and federal programs for 2012.
In the bold caption, I like to insert the word local before state. I like to insert a comma after state. I like to eliminate the word and. After the word federal, I like to insert the word and insert the word private. At the end of the first sentence under the bold caption, after the word programs, I like to eliminate the period and add for 2012 and add a period. That concludes my amendment.
So it's going to read, it is recommended that the approval be granted for Lorain City Schools to apply for and participate in local, state, and federal and private grant programs for 2012.
That is correct.
Point of order, we're not voting on the caption, we're voting
Right.
on the
recommendation.
And the recommendation is exactly what you want, Mr. Fallis. So we're voting on the recommendation, I believe. So I'll go either way, but I don't want to complicate the world too much.
So in essence, Mr. Fallis, there is no vote on the caption title. Our vote is only on the recommendation.
Okay, if that's the rules, and thank you for educating me on the rules, then I would like to amend my amendment to state as follows. I'd like to add the words for 2012 in the sentence so we know exactly what time period this piece of work is for. Thank you.
Support.
Okay, so there is a recommendation in support for the amending to add for 2012 at the end of the recommendation.
Well, if we're going to be specific, it should probably say calendar year, not, because we have a fiscal year that's July through June. This is a calendar year, we do it every January, so why don't we just say for the calendar year 2012?
I think what happens is sometimes, this is just a comment, as we get into some of these details, we could impact, for example, some programs may extend over calendar year. It might be a grant, it's a 2-year grant. And as we start dipping into some of those pieces, we might compromise the authority to execute a grant. If we give authorization for 2012 and the grant is to be a 2-year grant, we may have to come back again. I don't know, but that, we don't want to tie folks' hands up, but I think it's clear that we're not trying to give too much range. But again, sometimes our language can be more of a barrier than maybe we would intend it to be. So,
Well, we're only talking about applying for a grant. That's all we're talking about. We're not talking about after we get the grant, it could be 5 years. And we do it every year. It's just being more specific, I think. The key word is apply for it, it's not that we're not limiting it into the grant to 2012, we're limiting it for...
the language says apply for and participate. So the participate,
All right, then, I agree. It's done okay as it is, so...
Well, I have a question now. Okay. Yeah, is the goal here to say, if a grant spills over into calendar year 2013, that we're not going to apply for it? We're
yeah,
trying to
I think the goal was to try and be more specific with the year, but I think our discussion yields that specificity could be limiting. So the language that is written unamended is where we have landed at. The motion as written is recommend the approval be granted for Lorain City Schools to apply for and participate in local, state, and federal grant programs.
Private.
And is there a motion and a second?
Do you want my advice and counsel on this one?
Please.
I wouldn't change it.
That's what, we didn't change anything. I just read it as was absolutely typed.
Because of what you said, Mr. Williams, you got to be careful with, because the grants are kind of 1 year, 2 year, and the board will know what we're applying for, type of thing. You guys should be a little careful with how we did it. That's my personal opinion.
Why does this have to be done every year? Why couldn't you just give a permanent? I can't believe there'd be any year we wouldn't want to apply for these things. Is there a state law that requires we do this every year? Or could we just do it and it would go forever?
You could probably change policy to do it that way if you wanted to. I would say yes.
Is this school board policy or is this?
I don't know.
All right, well.
My comment would be, I think it would be a best practice to reaffirm that we want to do this on an annual basis. So, I mean, I like these being in here at the organizational meeting.
Okay, so let's call this to order. Can we have the vote, please, on the amendment as read? Was there a second?
Have to ask the treasurer.
Who made the motion?
I thought Mr. Fallis did.
Well, I'll second it if nobody remembers it. So.
Motion by Mr. Fallis, second by Mr. Smith. Roll call, please.
Just for clarification, this is on the non-amended.
Yes, this is
correct?
number 9 as written.
Okay. Mr. Fallis.
Support. Yes.
Okay. Mr. Smith.
Yes.
Mr. Sturgill.
Yes, I think. Yeah, for no change, it's a yes.
Mr. Demakia. Mr. Williams.
Yes. Hopefully this one goes easily. Item 10, appointment of purchasing agent. It is recommended that the superintendent or his designee be appointed purchasing agent for calendar year 2012.
So move.
Second.
Discussion.
Actually, Mr. Williams.
Yes, sir.
You're changing what appears there because calendar is not on it.
I apologize, I will read. It is recommended that the superintendent or his designee be appointed purchasing agent for 2012.
It doesn't mean it shouldn't be there, however.
There's a motion? In support. Roll call, please.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Sturgill?
Yes.
Mr. Demakia?
Yes.
Mr. Fels?
Yes.
Mr. Williams?
Yes. Item 11, appointment of legal counsel. It is recommended that the board administration engage the legal services for general counsel of Giardini, Cook, and Nicole, and other legal counsel as needed.
Motion to approve item 11.
Support.
Second.
Any discussion?
Yes, with our present economic situation, I think we have saved a good deal of money over the last 4 years. There's no doubt about that. But I think we are missing a chance to we need to look at every opportunity, and although the city law director probably could not handle all of our legal needs, the ones he could handle, we would get no bill for. Last year, we spent, last school year, $182,000. The year before that, $198,000. The year before that, $173,000. So I think I'm certainly not opposed to Mr. Giardini's law services, but I do think we need to do two things. We need to use the city law director to the extent he's able to help us, and maybe it's time we do an RFP, request for proposals, to see if we could get what legal service we have to pay for at the best price possible. No, there's a motion on the table.
Any more discussion? Do we have we have a first and a second, so we're ready for a roll call vote?
On what Mr. Smith said?
No,
No,
on the motion.
the vote is on the,
I wasn't amending anything.
Oh,
I was
okay.
only
He was-
pointing something out.
You know,
Okay.
on this point, I'd like to say that even though Mr. Smith gave out some correct figures, that when I sat out there in 2007, before I was on the board, I was seeing figures of $600,000. Now, we could do a request for proposal, but, I mean, from what I've read, the attorney, Mr. Giardini, Cook, and Nickel has already cut our cost in half. Okay, but I mean, if you want to be fair, you have to go back and take a look at the history. Mr. Smith taught me that well, but I just wanted to say that it's already been established that we did go towards the savings. Okay, so.
and to add some context historically, very recently, probably within the last 60 days, perhaps we did have Mr. Riley from the city come in and do a presentation to the board and explain to us the challenges and the perhaps incapacity of his office at the city to represent us, both based on a personnel issue, based on a cost, and based on an expertise. And this was what he reported to us, which was similar to, this was probably at least a second request of information from him. We will continue to do due diligence in terms of seeking the most efficient and cost-effective measures of representation. But from a qualitative point of view and from a fiscal point of view, Mr. Giardini has represented us well and has been able to generate significant savings. So by no means does this discussion have any negative regard for how the board feels about the services provided, but it does reflect our need, especially in our fiscal times, to be as efficient as we possibly can. So Mr. Smith's suggestions are taken seriously, and this is I think the intent of the entire board. So as we move forward, we're always looking for efficiencies, but again, we've been represented well, and it has resulted in significant savings to the district, as well as qualitative representation in terms of administrating our legal business. Any more comments?
I have a general comment. The school district certainly is faced with a $12 million deficit. And so we do need to take a look at, on a go-forward basis, various contracts that we have with different service providers, whether it's insurance, electricity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, to meet the deficit. So I will have some further comments along the line, but I just wanted to make a general comment.
Thank you.
At this moment, thank you.
Can we have the roll call?
Mr. Demakia?
Yes.
Mr. Sturgill?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
No.
Mr. Fells?
Yes.
Mr. Williams?
Yes. Item number 12, OSBA Policy Service Contract. It is recommended that the OSBA Policy Service Contract in the amount of $300 be approved for 2012-2013.
Motion to approve item 12.
Second.
Discussion?
What do we get for the $300?
What do we get for that?
Yeah, because we hired a company to do policy. I'm not saying it's that we shouldn't do it, I'm just asking what do we get? Is that the updates we get when there needs to be policy change because of legislation?
Well, this is, the Neola one is a different service than this. OSBA service is, I've used them, I think you have, Mr. Smith, too, where you can call down there and get some, lack of a better term, legal advice for things if you want to, and there's no billing, there's nothing like that, clarification on issues. They don't offer legal opinions, they don't like the term
But
legal
this
advice.
is specifically policy service. The other dues, the 8,000, and I'll give us the other, I think. Well, you don't have to do it tonight, but I'd like a little clarification from them what we get for $300. I think it's just keeping us aware of, sometimes there's federal or state legislation that requires a school board to create or to amend an existing policy. Could this be what they charge to watchdog that for us and send us an alert for instance, there was just federal regulations passed regarding the non-binding appropriate language in the area of sexual things. And I'm glad to know that our congressmen and senators are busy looking at stuff like that, but it's things like that that change, that maybe that service is what alerts us to, hey, you got to look at your policies in this area and amend them. I don't know. Try to find out if you can.
I will find out.
Thank you.
I believe what this one is the ability to call OSBA.
Okay, well, just...
But we'll clarify it for you.
Fine.
And Dale, Mr. Weber, I'm sorry, if you could, as we look at the new Neola contract, perhaps comparatively, what this service provides compared to that, and if we see there's an exact duplication of service, of course, you could bring that to us again. If there's maybe a few overlaps, but there's still an advantage, we should know that also, so at least we can know whether we're duplicating a service or not, if that's okay. But we will go ahead, there's motion to...
One more thing, now, remember, this is not calendar. This is for July 2012 through
Right.
June
2013.
2013.
That's
Okay.
correct. Right.
So there's a first and a second, roll call?
Mr. Demakia? Mr. Sturgill?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes?
Mr. Fells?
Yes.
Mr. Williams?
Yes. Item 13, authorization for investment of funds. It is recommended that the treasurer be authorized to invest all available funds in securities as permitted by law and board policy DFA.
Motion for approval.
Support?
Discussion?
Mr. Fallis?
Yes.
Mr. Williams?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Demakia? Mr. Sturgill?
Yes.
Item number 14, request for available monies. It is recommended that the treasurer be authorized to request tax advances from Lorain, from the county auditor as monies become available, and the board further requests that the county auditor to advance 90% of all funds available at any time as required by law.
Motion for approval.
Second.
Discussion? Roll call.
Mr. Fallis?
Yes.
Mr. Sturgill?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Demakia? Mr. Williams?
Yes. Item 15, consider petty cash authorization. It is recommended that the treasurer be authorized to establish petty cash funds on an as-needed basis up to $5,000 per fund.
Motion for approval.
Support?
Discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Fallis?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Demakia? Mr. Sturgill?
Yes.
Mr. Williams?
Yes. Item 16, consider change fund authorization. It is recommended that the treasurer be authorized to establish change funds on an as-needed basis up to $1,500 per fund.
So move.
Second.
Discussion?
This is so there's money to make change, right?
Correct.
And the buildings are,
Could be for sporting events, that kind
Yeah.
of thing, too. Yeah.
okay.
Roll call?
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Sturgill?
Yes.
Mr. Fallis?
Yes.
Mr. Demakia? Mr. Williams?
Yes. Item 17, agreement for payment of educational costs. It is recommended that the superintendent be authorized to enter into agreements with other districts for the payment of educational costs for students who are placed out of the district by district agreement and/or court order pursuant to Section 3323 of the Ohio Revised Code.
Motion to approve.
Support?
Discussion,
Just as a word of explanation,
please?
if Children's Services removes a child from a Lorain home and puts it in foster care in Amherst, Lorain is still responsible for the cost of that child's public education. And if someone in Elyria is removed and has a foster home in Lorain, is that your understanding, Dr. Branham? Correct. Okay.
Any other discussion or explanation? Roll call, please.
Mr. Sturgill?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Fallis?
Yes.
Mr. Demakia? Mr. Williams?
Yes. Item 18, adjournment of the organizational meeting.
So move.
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Fallis?
Yes.
Mr. Demakia? Mr. Sturgill?
Yes.
Mr. Williams?
Yes. Meeting is adjourned.